The phone slipped from my hand. The screen shattered into jagged pieces on the floor. But it wasn't the phone that made my heart drop. It was the words I had just heard. The words my father thought I couldn't hear. She's a mistake. Should have never seen the world. I froze, unable to move. The voice on the other end was his, clear as day, laced with that unmistakable venom. I wasn't supposed to be there. I wasn't supposed to hear this. But I did. And once it hit me, once the weight of it crushed my chest, there was no going back. For a moment the world seemed to stop. The colors of the room bled together into a dull gray, and I could hear the blood rushing in my ears. My father. The man who had always been my hero in the dark corners of my childhood. This man, this monster, had just condemned me. Like I was nothing more than a bad dream that needed to be erased. I picked up the phone, trembling, my hands slick with sweat. I pressed the end call button, but the damage had already been done. I had heard enough. "You okay, honey?" My mother's voice broke through the fog in my mind. She was in the kitchen, her voice light, trying to sound normal. But I could hear the exhaustion in her tone, the quiet despair that she hid so well behind a smile. I didn't respond right away. The silence between us stretched long, too long. My thoughts were a jumbled mess, and I couldn't find the words to tell her what I had just heard. How do you tell your mother that her husband, the man she loved, the father who had always promised to protect you, had just called you a mistake? "I'm fine," I muttered, finally finding my voice. Came out hollow, empty, and I hated it. But I didn't know what else to say. "You sure?" she called from the kitchen. "You sound a little off. You've been looking pale lately. Maybe you should get some rest." I didn't want to talk to her about this. I didn't want to admit that everything I thought I knew about my family, about the man who had raised me, had just shattered into 1,000 pieces. The worst part. I could feel the weight of it all crashing in on me, like a storm that I couldn't outrun. But I couldn't tell her. She would say it was just a bad day, just a moment of frustration. She would protect him. She always did. But it wasn't a bad day. It wasn't frustration. It was hate. And the truth was, I wasn't the only one who had been living in its shadow. "Yeah, just tired," I finally said, trying to sound convincing. "All right. Come down for dinner when you're ready," she called. Dinner. My stomach churned at the thought. How could I sit down across from him, eat my meal, pretend everything was fine when I knew what he thought of me? When I knew what he truly felt? The words rang in my head over and over again. "She's a mistake." I grabbed the jacket off the back of the chair and stormed out the door, not bothering to say anything to her. The night air hit me like a slap, cold and sharp, and I breathed it in, trying to clear the fog in my head. Had to get away. Had to think. But the longer I walked, the more it started to sink in. This was it. The thing I had been avoiding for so long. The thing I had known deep down but never let myself truly believe. My father didn't love me. He never had. I kept walking, lost in my thoughts, the city lights blurring past me when I heard it. The sound of my phone ringing. I pulled it out, my heart leaping in my chest. I didn't want to look. But I had to. It was him. I almost didn't answer. But I did. Because at the end of the day, I was still that little girl hoping he would say something that would make it all go away. "Anna." His voice was low, controlled. "I know you heard what I said. I didn't mean it. It was a moment of weakness. You know how I get sometimes." I didn't respond immediately. His words felt like poison on my skin. He was trying to make it sound like an accident, something out of his control. But I wasn't buying it. Not anymore. "You don't get to say things like that," I managed, my voice steady despite the storm inside me. "You don't get to call me a mistake. I'm not a mistake, Dad." There was a long pause on the other end, and I could almost hear him searching for the right words. Or maybe he was just too used to people forgiving him. Too used to his lies being accepted. "Well, I didn't mean it like that," he finally said. "You know I love you, Anna. You're my daughter." But the words didn't feel like love. They felt like a knife twisting deeper into my gut. I didn't want to hear it. Not now. Not when I knew the truth. "You've never loved me," I said, my voice cracking slightly. "You've loved the idea of me, the way I fit into your life, but not me. Not the real me. And I'm done pretending I'm okay with it." He didn't answer right away. I could hear the sound of him shifting on the other end, probably thinking of something to say that would make it all go away. But it wouldn't. It was too late. "I'm done, Dad," I whispered, my voice barely audible. "I'm done." I hung up before he could say anything else. The phone in my hand felt heavy, like it was carrying the weight of everything I had just said. And everything I had just lost. I didn't go home that night. Couldn't. Not after what I had just heard, not after what I had just said. I couldn't sit across from him at the dinner table, act like everything was fine, when all I could hear in my head was his voice. "She's a mistake." I walked aimlessly through the streets, my mind a mess of rage and confusion. The lights from the city blurred around me, like they were trying to escape, like they knew what I had just learned and couldn't bear to look at it either. The anger bubbled up again, hot and painful, and I didn't know where to put it. My father had always been the one constant, the one man I thought I could trust no matter what. But now I saw him for who he truly was. A man too weak to love, too broken to care, and too arrogant to see how deeply he had scarred me. I found myself near the pier, the familiar sound of waves crashing against the shore grounding me, if only for a moment. I stood there, staring out at the water, trying to drown out the sound of his words, but they kept coming back. They were relentless. "She's a mistake." I pressed my palms into my eyes, trying to push the tears away. This wasn't who I was supposed to be. I wasn't supposed to cry over him. I wasn't supposed to be weak like this. I had spent years putting up walls, building this persona of strength, of someone who couldn't be broken. But now, in the dark, by myself, I realized how much of myself I had given up to keep him happy. I had become someone else. Someone he could control. But no more. I turned away from the water and made my way back toward the city. I didn't have a plan. I didn't know what I was doing or where I was going. All I knew was that I needed to get away from him. From his words. From the life he had made me live. I ended up at a bar, a place I knew well enough to disappear for a while. It was dark, the low hum of conversations and clinking glasses the only sounds around me. I found a seat at the far end of the counter, ordered a drink, and let the burn in my throat distract me from the storm that raged inside me. I didn't know how long I sat there, nursing my drink, watching the world move around me, feeling like I was the only one standing still. The hours bled into each other, and for a while I was able to pretend everything was okay. That it wasn't all unraveling at the seams. But then the door opened. It was him. I froze, the glass halfway to my mouth. I didn't want to believe it. Couldn't. But there he was, his face familiar in the worst way, that smug look on his face like nothing had ever happened, like nothing had ever changed. I looked down at my drink, hoping he wouldn't see me, hoping he would just walk past, pretend like we hadn't just spoken on the phone, pretend that everything was still the same. But he didn't. He walked toward me, and for a moment I thought about leaving. I thought about walking out the door and never looking back. But something inside me, something I hadn't felt in years, stopped me. He stood beside me, his breath heavy with whiskey, his hand reaching out to pat me on the shoulder. I couldn't move, couldn't speak. I was frozen in place, my heart pounding in my chest. "You all right, kid?" His voice was low, gruff, like he was trying to pretend nothing had happened. I didn't answer right away. I just stared at my drink, the ice clinking softly in the glass. "Don't act like you care," I finally said, my voice low and cold. "You don't. You never did." His hand faltered for a moment. Then he laughed, a short, hollow sound that made me shiver. "Come on, kid. You're just upset. We all say stupid things when we're drunk. You don't get to make excuses anymore," I said, my voice trembling with a mixture of rage and pain. "You don't get to treat me like I don't matter and then try to play the good father card. It's too late for that." His eyes narrowed, and I could see the anger bubbling up beneath his calm exterior. He was trying to control the situation, trying to put me back in the place where he held the power, but I wasn't going to let him. Not anymore. I'm done being your little girl, I said, standing up from the stool. I'm done pretending. And I'm done caring. He stood there for a moment, his face hardening. You don't know what you're saying, he muttered, taking a step closer. I know exactly what I'm saying, I shot back. I'm saying that I'm done with you. I don't need you anymore. You're nothing but a liar and a coward. And with that, I turned on my heel and walked out of the bar, not looking back. I didn't need to. I had already said everything I needed to say. The cold air hit me again, sharper this time, as if the night was trying to remind me of the weight of the world I was carrying. But it didn't matter. Not anymore. I was free. The streets felt different now, like they were stretching before me in a way I had never noticed. The weight of the conversation with my father was heavy on my shoulders, but there was also a strange sense of liberation. I had just walked away from him, not just physically but emotionally. For so long I had carried the weight of his words, of his expectations. But now I had let them go. It was terrifying, but it was also freeing. I kept walking, the cold air biting at my skin, my thoughts racing. I didn't know where I was going. I didn't even care. I just needed space. Space to breathe. Space to think. To process everything that had just happened. I found myself outside a small park, the kind of place I used to go when I needed to escape. The benches were empty, the streetlights casting long shadows on the ground, but it was quiet, peaceful. I sat down on one of the benches, feeling the cool metal beneath me. I closed my eyes for a moment, just letting the stillness wash over me. It was almost like I was waiting for something, waiting for a sign or for the feeling of being whole again. But it didn't come. There was no instant moment of clarity, no grand realization. Instead, all I felt was exhaustion, the kind that runs deep into your bones, the kind that only comes after years of carrying something you shouldn't have to. The sound of footsteps approaching broke the silence, and I opened my eyes to see a figure walking towards me. I wasn't in the mood for company, but something about the person made me stay where I was. Maybe it was the way they walked, the quiet confidence in their step. Mind if I sit? A voice asked, gentle yet firm. I looked up and saw a woman standing in front of me, her dark hair pulled back into a tight ponytail, her face soft but worn. She was holding a cup of coffee in one hand, and her eyes held a knowing look, like she could see past my defenses without trying. Sure, I said, not sure what else to say. She sat down next to me, taking a sip from her coffee, the silence stretching between us before she spoke again. You look like you've been carrying the weight of the world on your shoulders. I didn't respond at first. It wasn't that I didn't want to talk. It was just that the words were stuck. Finally, I let out a shaky breath. I just found out that everything I thought I knew about my family, about my dad, was a lie. She didn't say anything right away, but I could tell she wasn't judging me. Instead, she was just letting me speak. He called me a mistake, I continued, the words tasting bitter in my mouth. Like I shouldn't even exist. Like I've always been a burden to him. Her gaze softened, and she placed the coffee cup down on the bench between us. That's a heavy thing to carry, she said quietly. But it's not your fault. I know, I muttered, though the words felt hollow. It's just hard to believe that. To believe that the man who raised me, who promised he'd always protect me, could think that way about me. She looked at me for a moment, her eyes thoughtful. Sometimes the people who are supposed to love us the most are the ones who hurt us the hardest. But that doesn't make it our fault. It never does. I stared ahead, not knowing what to say. She was right, but hearing those words didn't make the pain go away. It didn't make the betrayal any easier to swallow. What do you do when you realize your whole life has been a lie? I asked, the question coming out more bitterly than I intended. She paused, as though considering the question carefully. You don't forget it, she said slowly. You don't pretend it didn't happen. But you move forward. You take the parts of you that are real, the parts that matter, and you build something new. I shook my head. I don't know how to do that. None of us do at first, she replied softly. But you will. Just takes time. And a little bit of faith in yourself. I wanted to believe her. I wanted to believe that everything would eventually make sense. But the truth was, I didn't know what to do with myself right now. I had spent so long being the good daughter, the one who always did what was expected of her, that I didn't even know who I was without that. Without the role he had made me play. "Do you want to talk about it?" she asked, her voice gentle but insistent. For a moment I almost said no. I almost told her I didn't need anyone's help. But then something shifted inside me. Maybe it was the way she didn't ask out of obligation. Or maybe it was just the exhaustion finally catching up with me. Either way, I found myself nodding. "Yeah," I said quietly. "I think I do." We spent the next hour talking, and in a way it felt like my first real conversation in years. Not with my father, not with my mother, but with someone who saw me. Saw the real me. Not the daughter who had to hide her pain. Not the person who had to pretend everything was fine. But the person who was broken, and who didn't know how to pick up the pieces. When the conversation ended, I felt something shift inside me. I didn't have all the answers. I didn't even have a clear path forward. But for the first time in a long time I felt like I could breathe. I got up to leave, but before I did, she smiled at me. "You'll be okay," she said, and I believed her. The days following that night were both the longest and shortest of my life. The phone call with my father echoed in my mind constantly. But the conversation with the woman at the park kept replaying too. For the first time I felt a little less alone in this world, like there were people who understood how much it hurt to love someone who only hurt you in return. But the hardest part was still ahead of me. How do you face someone who's been your whole world for so long, someone who's promised you everything, only to watch them shatter everything you thought was true? How do you go back to being in the same house with that person, pretending like nothing ever happened? The tension in the house was palpable, and I could feel it in the air every time I walked through the door. My mother, as usual, was trying to hold everything together. But I saw the cracks in her, the way she would flinch when I got too close, the way she stayed up late, pretending to be busy when I knew she was just avoiding the silence between us. And then there was my father. After everything, he acted as though nothing had changed. His coldness was like a wall. And every time I looked at him, I saw the same man who had thrown those words at me. The same man who had rejected me. And yet, he expected me to sit down and have dinner with him like everything was fine. But I couldn't. I couldn't pretend anymore. One night I sat in my room, staring out the window. The city lights were blurred by the rain, the droplets tracing lines down the glass. My mind kept going back to that moment. The words, the betrayal. I couldn't let it go. But I also couldn't keep living like this. I had to confront him. The thought of it terrified me. But if I didn't, I would be stuck in this place forever. Trapped in a lie, trapped in his control. I had to take back my life. I had to do it for myself. For my future. I heard my mother's footsteps outside my door, soft and tentative. She knocked gently, her voice barely audible through the wood. "Anna. Can we talk?" I stood up quickly, wiping my hands on my jeans, trying to shake off the nerves that had built up in my chest. "Yeah, Mom. Come in." The door opened slowly, and she stepped inside, her eyes weary but filled with love. She had that familiar look on her face, the one that said she was trying to be strong for both of us, but I could see the cracks in her too. She had been trying so hard to keep it all together, to protect me, to protect us. "Are you okay?" she asked, her voice soft. I wanted to tell her everything, to finally let it all out. But the words were stuck in my throat, caught between anger and sadness. So instead I just nodded. "I'm fine." She didn't believe me, I could see that in the way she was watching me. "You're not fine, Anna. I know you're not. You've been carrying so much for so long. And I can see it. It's breaking you." I felt my chest tighten, the lump in my throat growing as the tears threatened to spill. She wasn't wrong. I was breaking. But I didn't know how to stop it. I didn't know how to fix what had been broken. "I don't know how to keep doing this, Mom," I said, my voice cracking. "I don't know how to go back to pretending everything's okay. How do I sit at the table and look at him after everything he's done?" She didn't answer right away. She just stepped closer, pulling me into a hug. Her arms around me felt like a refuge, like the only safe place left in the world. "I don't know either, sweetheart," she whispered. "I wish I could give you an answer, but I can't. I wish I could take all this pain away, but I can't." "Why didn't you leave him, Mom?" The question had been on my mind for so long, and now it slipped out without me even realizing it. "Why did you stay with him all these years? Why didn't you leave when you knew? When you knew he didn't love us?" She pulled back slightly, looking me in the eyes, her hands on my shoulders. "I stayed because I thought I was doing what was best for you. For both of you. I thought I could protect you from the hurt. But I didn't realize until now that I wasn't protecting you at all. I was just letting him hurt you both. And I let myself believe it was okay. That it was normal." I felt a lump form in my throat, a wave of anger mixed with deep sadness. "I'm sorry," I whispered, the words thick with emotion. "I should have seen it. I should have known." "No, baby," she said, shaking her head. "You don't need to apologize. You were a child. You shouldn't have had to carry all that. But now you have to find a way to let it go. To stop carrying it." The silence between us hung heavy, but I could feel something shifting inside me. Something deep, something that had been buried for too long. "I'm going to talk to him," I said, my voice firm, though the fear was still there. "I can't keep living like this. I need to face him. I need to stop pretending." She looked at me, her eyes filled with both fear and pride. "Are you sure, Anna?" "I'm sure," I said, my voice steady now. "I can't keep letting him control me. I need to do this. For me." She pulled me into another hug, this one tighter than before. "I'm so proud of you. You've always been stronger than you know. Don't let him make you think otherwise." I nodded, not sure if I believed it yet, but her words were enough to give me the strength to do what I needed to do. I wasn't ready to forgive him. Not yet. Maybe not ever. But I was ready to take back control of my life. And that was the first step. The confrontation was inevitable. I knew that. But nothing could have prepared me for the reality of it. For standing face to face with a man who had been my protector and my tormentor. The man whose love had always come with strings attached. The man whose words had shaped my very existence. And now, whose words were choking the life out of me. I stood at the door to his study, my heart pounding in my chest. The sound of it seemed deafening in the stillness of the house, echoing off the walls as though it was trying to warn me to turn back. But I didn't. I knocked once, twice, and then, without waiting for a response, I opened the door. He looked up from his desk, where he had been scribbling something. When he saw me, there was a flicker of something. Surprise, maybe, or just annoyance. He didn't stand, didn't even move. Just stared at me as if I were some sort of inconvenience he had to deal with. "What is it now?" His voice was sharp, dismissive, and my stomach turned. "I need to talk to you," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. He sighed, leaning back in his chair, as though he had all the time in the world. "This better be quick. I have a lot to do." I took a deep breath, steeling myself for what was coming next. The words I had been carrying for so long were finally bubbling to the surface. "Do you think I don't know what you said?" I forced myself to meet his eyes. "Do you think I didn't hear you? She's a mistake, right? Should have never seen the world. You really think that's how I'm supposed to feel? Like I don't belong here?" The silence between us was suffocating. His gaze flickered for a second, just a flicker, but then he recovered, his face going cold again. He didn't speak for a long moment, and for a second I thought he might try to deny it, make excuses, lie to my face like he always had. But he didn't. Instead, he simply shrugged. "I meant what I said," he said, his voice low and almost bored. "You've always been a burden. I've kept you around because that's what I'm supposed to do. But don't think for a second I'm proud of you." His words hit me like a slap to the face, harder than any physical blow he could have landed. My knees almost buckled, but I held my ground. I had come this far. I wasn't going to back down now. "You don't get to do that anymore," I said, my voice thick with the weight of everything I had been holding back. You don't get to treat me like that. You don't get to call me a mistake and then act like nothing happened. I'm not going to let you make me feel like I'm less than nothing anymore. He leaned forward slightly, his eyes narrowing. You think you're some kind of hero now, don't you? He sneered. You think you've got it all figured out because you're standing up to me? I'm your father. You owe me respect. You lost that respect the moment you called me a mistake. I shot back. You lost it the moment you decided I wasn't worth your love, your support, your effort. I don't owe you anything. Not anymore. He stared at me, his jaw clenched, his face turning a shade darker. But he didn't say anything for a long moment. It was like he was trying to process the fact that I wasn't backing down, that I wasn't the scared little girl I had been all those years ago. You really think you're done with me? He said finally, his voice low and dangerous. You think you can just walk away from everything I've done for you, everything I've given you? I clenched my fists, trying to keep my hands steady. Everything you've given me, I repeated, disbelief lacing my voice. You've given me nothing but pain, nothing but lies and control. And I'm done with it. I took a step forward, standing taller now, the weight of his gaze no longer making me shrink back. I'm done being your puppet. I'm done being the person you get to control and tear down whenever it suits you. I'm done with you trying to make me feel like I'm not enough. 'Cause I am. And I don't need your approval anymore. I never did. He looked at me like I had just slapped him, the realization that I wasn't afraid of him anymore finally hitting him. He took a deep breath, trying to regain his composure, but I could see it in his eyes. He was losing control. I don't know what kind of fantasy world you think you're living in, he sneered. But you're just a child. You'll never survive without me. I don't need you to survive, I said, my voice steady, firm. I've been surviving without you for years. And I'm stronger than you'll ever understand. There was a long silence, and for a second it felt like time had stopped. Like nothing else mattered except this moment. This truth. He had no power over me anymore. I had taken it back. I turned to leave, my heart still racing, my mind still reeling from everything I had just said. But as I reached the door, I heard him call my name. His voice tight, almost pleading. Anna. Please. Don't leave me like this. I paused for a moment but didn't turn around. I'm not leaving you. You left me a long time ago. And with that I stepped out the door, my heart pounding in my chest, but for the first time in years I felt free. The night air felt colder when I stepped outside, the weight of my father's words still hanging in the back of my mind like a shadow I couldn't shake off. But as I walked away from the house, away from him, I realized something. I had just taken back a piece of myself. And that was worth more than any apology or any attempt at reconciliation he could ever offer. I kept walking, letting the cool breeze clear the burning thoughts in my head. The city lights blurred around me, but the rhythm of my footsteps was steady. I wasn't running anymore. I was moving forward. And for the first time I wasn't looking back. I found myself at the park again, the place I had gone so many times in the past when I needed to think, when I needed to escape. The swings creaked softly in the wind, the empty seats swaying gently as if waiting for someone to come back. I sat down on one of the benches, my hands trembling as I ran them through my hair. My chest felt tight, like the weight of everything that had happened was finally catching up to me. But there was a shift inside me. A quiet strength I hadn't known I had. I had spent so many years trying to make sense of my father's cruelty, trying to fix what he had broken. But now I understood something. I wasn't the one who needed fixing. He was. It was a simple realization, but it hit me harder than anything I had ever felt. I wasn't the problem. I wasn't the mistake. He was. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel the need to apologize for it. I didn't need to fix him anymore. I didn't need to seek his approval. I didn't need his love. 'Cause I had my own. I heard footsteps approaching, and when I looked up, I saw my mother walking toward me. She had that same quiet look on her face, the one she always wore when she was trying to be strong for both of us. But I knew her well enough to see through the mask she wore. I could see the sadness in her eyes, the exhaustion. She had been carrying this weight for years just like I had. "Anna," she said softly, sitting down beside me on the bench. "Are you okay?" I wanted to lie. I wanted to tell her that everything was fine, that nothing had changed. But that wouldn't be true. Things had changed. "I don't know if I am," I said honestly, my voice thick with emotion. "But I'm trying. I'm really trying, Mom." She looked at me, her eyes filled with concern but also with pride. "I'm so proud of you," she whispered. "I never thought you'd be able to stand up to him like that." "I didn't think I could either," I said, letting out a shaky breath. "But I realized something tonight. I don't need him. I don't need his approval, his love, or his forgiveness. I'm not the mistake he made me feel like I was. I'm not broken. I'm not his to fix." Her hand found mine and she squeezed it gently. "You're stronger than you know. You've always been. But you're not alone in this. You never have been." "I know," I said, a tear slipping down my cheek. "But I'm ready to be my own person now. To live for me. Not for him, not for anyone else. Just for me." We sat in silence for a long time, the night wrapping around us like a comforting blanket. It wasn't perfect. I wasn't perfect. But for the first time in my life, I felt like I was finally stepping into who I was meant to be. The person I had buried for so long, the person who had been afraid to speak up, afraid to stand up for herself. That person was gone. And in her place stood someone stronger. Someone who could face the truth, no matter how painful it was. I didn't need my father's approval to be whole. I had my mother's love, and that was enough. The next day, I didn't go back to the house. Couldn't. Not yet. But I didn't stay away either. I went to work. I met with friends. I kept moving forward one step at a time. But it wasn't easy. The anger still lingered like a dull ache deep inside me. I still found myself questioning everything my father had said, every word he had ever spoken to me. And there were moments when I felt the weight of it all again, the burden of years of manipulation, of rejection, of feeling like I was never good enough. But every time it came, I fought it off. Every time I reminded myself that I was enough. That I was worth something, even if he didn't think so. Kept working. Kept building. Slowly but surely, I was creating the life I had always wanted, the life I had always dreamed of. It wasn't perfect. There were days when I wanted to scream, when I wanted to cry and throw everything away. But those days were becoming fewer. And then, one night a few months later, I found myself back at the park, sitting on the same bench where I had first realized what I had to do. The night was quiet, the only sound the rustling of leaves in the wind. I closed my eyes, taking a deep breath, and for the first time in so long I felt at peace. It wasn't the kind of peace that comes with forgetting or letting things slide. It was the kind of peace that comes with facing the truth, with standing in the wreckage and realizing that you're still alive. Still standing. "I'm not a mistake," I whispered to myself, the words finally feeling like they were mine. And for the first time I truly believed them. The days became weeks, and the weeks turned into months. Slowly, the shadow of my father's words started to fade. Not because I had forgiven him, not because he deserved it, but because I had learned how to live without him. I had learned to let go of the weight he had forced on me for so long. It wasn't easy. There were moments when I still caught myself holding my breath, waiting for the familiar sting of his rejection, the coldness of his indifference. But every time I felt it creeping back, I reminded myself. I didn't need him. I had begun to find pieces of myself that I had buried so deep for so long. I started to rediscover things I had forgotten. Things I used to love, like painting, like going for long runs in the morning, like listening to music late at night with the windows open. Things that weren't tied to the version of myself that had been conditioned to please him. I still had moments of doubt. Moments when I thought about what I had lost. Years of my life that I would never get back. But then, I reminded myself that I wasn't the one who had wasted those years. He was. He was the one who had chosen to tear our family apart, to make me feel like I wasn't enough. And he had done it so many times, so many years, that it had become a part of him. But I wasn't him. It was me. I had made the decision to move out of the house. It wasn't something I'd planned, but it was something I knew I had to do. I couldn't keep living under the same roof as him, pretending everything was okay when I knew it wasn't. When I knew I wasn't okay. It was a small apartment, but it was mine. It was quiet, with the faint hum of the city outside my window. The walls weren't filled with the anger that had once consumed me. And for the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe. The first night I spent there was the first night I had slept through without waking up to the sound of my father's voice in my head. Without hearing the echoes of his words, his insults, his rejection. For the first time I could let go. For the first time I could sleep in peace. And the next morning when I woke up, I smiled for the first time in a long time. It wasn't a smile of joy or excitement. It was a smile of relief. A smile of knowing that I had taken a step forward. That I had made it. I started spending more time with friends, people who didn't know me as his daughter. People who didn't have any expectations of me. People who just wanted to be around me because they liked me for who I was. It was refreshing. It was freeing. I had spent so many years feeling like I was nothing more than an extension of my father. But now I was just me. I went out for coffee with a friend one afternoon, and as we sat outside on the cafe's patio, I found myself laughing. Really laughing, not the forced kind of laughter I had used to hide behind for years. But the kind that comes when you're truly happy, when you're truly free. "What's going on with you?" my friend asked, her eyes curious. "You seem different lately. Lighter. Happier." I shrugged, but the truth was, I wasn't sure what had changed. Maybe it was the apartment. Maybe it was the fact that I had finally spoken my truth. Maybe it was just the simple realization that I didn't have to live in the shadow of my father's cruelty anymore. "I guess I'm just figuring things out," I said, smiling again. Finally letting go of the things that were holding me back. She smiled back, her eyes soft with understanding. "I'm proud of you, Anna. You've been through a lot. And I can see you coming into your own. It's amazing." Her words settled in my chest like a warm hug, and for a moment I let myself feel proud. Proud of myself, proud of how far I had come. I had been through hell, but I had made it out. And now I was starting over. But not just starting over. Rebuilding. A few weeks later, I decided to visit my mother. I hadn't seen her much since I had moved out, and I knew she was probably missing me. I still hadn't had a full conversation with her about what had happened, about my father, about everything that had changed. And I knew we needed to talk. When I walked into the house, I could tell things were different. She was sitting at the kitchen table, a cup of tea in her hands, her expression peaceful but tired. She had always worn that tired look, like she was trying to carry the world on her shoulders. But now, it looked different. Lighter. "Hey, Mom," I said, walking into the kitchen. "How are you?" She looked up and smiled at me, but it wasn't the sad smile I had seen for so many years. It was genuine, the kind of smile that said she was okay. "I'm good, honey. Really good. How about you?" "I'm okay," I replied, sitting down across from her. "Actually, I'm more than okay. I'm starting to feel like myself again." She studied me for a moment, and then her smile softened. "I'm glad to hear that. You've been through so much, Anna. I know I wasn't always there for you. I was so focused on surviving that I didn't always see what was happening to you." I shook my head. "You didn't have to be perfect, Mom. You did the best you could. And I get it now." She reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "I just want you to be happy, honey. That's all I've ever wanted for you." "I know," I said, my voice soft. "I think I'm getting there." We sat in silence for a while, just being together. And for the first time in so long I felt peace. Real peace. Not the kind that comes from avoiding the truth, but the kind that comes from facing it head-on and knowing that you can handle it. That you can survive it. And I realized then, in that quiet moment, that I had finally healed. Not completely. Not perfectly. But enough. Enough to know that I had taken back control of my life. Enough to know that I was no longer a victim. I was free. The months that followed weren't easy. They weren't meant to be. I had done the hardest thing I'd ever had to do. Stood up to my father, faced the truth of who he was, and taken back control of my life. But the real work was in the aftermath. The rebuilding. The finding of myself again. I moved forward one step at a time. And sometimes those steps were small. Sometimes they were barely noticeable. But they were steps. And I kept taking them. I started going to therapy. It wasn't something I ever thought I needed. But after everything that had happened, I realized that there was no shame in asking for help. That my wounds, though invisible, were real. And they needed attention. So I went. I sat in the chair, staring at the therapist who had that calm, reassuring presence that made it all feel less overwhelming. The first session was awkward. I didn't know what to say, how to begin, or even if I should. But slowly I started talking. Talking about my childhood. About my father's cruelty. About my mother's silence. And how it had all shaped me. It was uncomfortable at first. But every word I spoke felt like it was lifting a weight from my chest. Every session felt like I was putting together the broken pieces of myself, one at a time. And though it didn't erase the past, it made it easier to breathe. It made it easier to live with. At the same time, I kept in touch with my mother. We hadn't talked much since I moved out, but I could see the change in her too. She was starting to find her own voice again, starting to reclaim the life that had been stolen from her. I could see it in the way she smiled more often, in the way she carried herself with more confidence. I saw the woman who had once been full of life, full of laughter, before everything had been swallowed by the weight of her marriage to my father. She started going to the community center, volunteering, finding things she loved to do that didn't revolve around taking care of everyone else. It was like she was discovering who she was outside of being a wife and a mother. And for the first time I saw her truly happy. Not perfect, not completely healed, but better, free in her own way. It wasn't easy for her either. It wasn't easy for either of us. But every day I saw a little more strength in her. I saw her learning to live for herself, not for him, not for anyone else. And that was the change we both needed. That was the healing we both deserved. But the hardest part, the part one hadn't anticipated, was what happened when I finally faced him again. It had been months since I'd spoken to my father. He had tried calling me a few times, but I'd ignored the calls. I couldn't bring myself to answer. I couldn't bring myself to hear his voice again, the voice that had betrayed me, that had called me a mistake. But one day he showed up at my apartment. I had no idea he was coming. It was late in the evening, and I was sitting on my couch, reading a book when I heard a knock at the door. It was a hesitant knock, almost like he was unsure of what to do. Froze. For a moment I thought about ignoring it, pretending I wasn't home. But then I stood up slowly, my heart pounding in my chest, and I walked to the door. When I opened it, there he was. My father. Standing in the doorway, looking older, smaller than I remembered. The man who had once seemed so large, so powerful, now looked like a broken shell of who he used to be. He didn't say anything at first. Just stood there looking at me. I could see the shame in his eyes, though he didn't admit it. And I could see something else too, the fear. The fear of losing me. Of losing control. "Anna," he said finally. His voice quiet, almost hesitant. "Can we talk?" I didn't answer right away. I just stared at him, unsure of what to say, unsure of how to react. I hadn't seen him in so long. I hadn't heard his voice in months. I didn't know if I was ready for this. But I opened the door wider, letting him in. He stepped inside, and we both stood there for a long moment, awkward and uncertain, as if neither of us knew what to do next. "Sit down," I said, motioning to the couch. He hesitated for a moment, then sat. His hands resting on his knees, his body tense. For a long time, neither of us spoke. I could feel the weight of everything that had been unsaid hanging in the room between us. The anger, the betrayal, the silence. But I couldn't just jump into it. I couldn't start with accusations or blame. Not now. "You know, I've thought about this moment a lot," I said finally, my voice quiet but firm. I've thought about what I would say to you if I ever saw you again. He didn't respond, just looked down at the floor. And for a moment, I wondered if he even cared about what I had to say. I wondered if he understood the damage he had done. I don't expect an apology, I said after a moment. I don't expect you to change. I don't expect anything from you. But I needed to tell you something. He looked up then, his eyes narrowing slightly, but still he didn't speak. I'm not your mistake, I said, the words feeling like they were coming from somewhere deep inside me, like they had been waiting to be said for years. I'm not the one who failed. I'm not the one who broke everything. He shifted uncomfortably in his seat, but I didn't care. I needed to say it. I needed him to hear it. I've spent my whole life trying to fix something that wasn't mine to fix, I continued, my voice shaking now. But I can't do it anymore. I'm done carrying your weight. I'm done trying to live up to your expectations. I don't need your approval anymore. And I don't need your love. He opened his mouth to speak, but I cut him off. You don't get to control me anymore, I said, standing up and walking toward the window. I'm done pretending. I'm done hoping you'll love me the way I've always needed you to. I turned to face him then, my heart pounding in my chest. I don't hate you, Dad. But I can't be your daughter anymore. I can't be the person you've tried to make me. I have to be me. The room was quiet for a long time after that. He didn't say anything. He just sat there watching me. And for the first time in my life, I felt like I had said everything that needed to be said. Had let go. The silence between us after that moment was thick, heavy. I had said everything I needed to say, but in that quiet space, there was still a lingering question. What now? What came after the words were spoken, after the truth was laid bare, after all the years of pain and disappointment were finally confronted? He didn't say anything. Not right away. I could feel his eyes on me, but I didn't look back. Couldn't. Not now. Not after everything I had just said. I didn't want to see the disappointment in his eyes. I didn't want to see him trying to figure out how to apologize or beg for forgiveness. It was too late for that. I'm leaving, I said, my voice steady, no longer carrying the tremor of the girl who had lived in fear for so long. I'm moving on. I've given you everything I have, and now I'm giving myself the chance to be free. I walked towards the door, my heart beating in my chest, louder now than it had ever been. The weight of it all, the years of silence, of waiting for someone to love me, finally lifted. And in that moment, as I stood in front of the door, I felt something else. I felt something powerful inside me, a strength I had never recognized before. A strength that had always been there, buried beneath the hurt, the confusion, and the years of trying to fit into a mold that wasn't mine to wear. I opened the door slowly, but before I could step outside, I heard his voice. It was weak, fragile, like he wasn't sure if he could say the words. Anna! I paused, my hand still on the door, and I looked back at him. He was still sitting there, his shoulders slumped, his face unreadable. Please don't leave like this, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Please don't shut me out. I stood there for a moment, torn between the old instinct to protect him, to care for him despite everything he had done, and the new understanding that I couldn't keep saving someone who had never once tried to save me. I'm not shutting you out, I said softly, my voice steady but firm. I'm just letting go. I'm not carrying your weight anymore, Dad. I'm not responsible for your happiness or your mistakes. I'm responsible for me now. The silence that followed was heavy. His eyes searched mine, looking for something. Maybe an apology, maybe an excuse. But there was nothing left to say. Nothing left to fix. I turned back to the door, the sound of the wind outside filling the space, and walked out without looking back. It was a quiet exit, but it felt like a victory. Not over him, but over everything he had made me believe about myself. Over the years I had spent chasing his approval, living in his shadow, questioning my worth. I was free. I walked down the street, the cold air rushing past me, and I felt like I was breathing for the first time in years. Like I had just shed a skin that had been suffocating me for far too long. The city felt different now, quieter somehow, like it was waiting for me to take the next step. I didn't know what that step was yet, but for the first time in my life I wasn't afraid of it. I spent the next few weeks in a haze, a strange mixture of relief and uncertainty. My apartment had become my sanctuary, the place where I could breathe, where I could think, and most importantly, where I could be myself. The weight of my father's rejection still lingered, but it didn't hold the same power over me. I had built a life away from him, away from the toxicity that had been my reality for so long. And as the days passed, I felt myself growing stronger, more sure of who I was, what I wanted, and what I was willing to accept. But even as I moved forward, I knew the past wasn't something I could just forget. It wasn't something that could be erased with a few good decisions or a change of scenery. The scars were still there, hidden beneath the surface. And even though I was free from the grip of my father's manipulation, I still carried the weight of those years with me. But I wasn't carrying it alone anymore. I had people now. People who loved me for who I was, who didn't expect me to be anything other than myself. I had found friends who understood, friends who didn't ask me to hide, who didn't try to fix me. They just accepted me. And that, in itself, was a kind of healing I had never known before. One afternoon, a few weeks after I had left my father's house, I ran into an old friend. Her name was Sarah, and we had gone to school together, though we had lost touch after graduation. We met at a coffee shop, both of us surprised but happy to see each other. "Anna," she asked, her eyes lighting up when she recognized me. "Is it really you?" I smiled, and for the first time in a long time it was a real smile. A smile that wasn't hiding anything. A smile that didn't come with any weight behind it. "It's really me," I said, and I meant it. We spent the next few hours catching up, talking about everything that had happened in the years we had been apart. She was the first person who really heard my story, who really listened without judgment. And in her, I found a kind of understanding that had eluded me for so long. She didn't ask me about my father, didn't ask me to explain anything. She just accepted me as I was, no questions asked. Felt like the world was opening up again. Like the doors that had been shut for so long were finally being unlocked. The pain wasn't gone and the scars would take time to heal, but for the first time I felt like I could handle it. I had taken the hardest step. And now everything else felt possible. The days turned into weeks, and the weeks into months, but the change I had started to feel never seemed to fade. It was like I had finally shed the skin of the person I had been, and in its place, a new version of me was emerging, stronger, clearer, and ready for whatever came next. I spent more time with my mother, too. As much as she tried to hide it, I could see the difference in her, just as I saw it in myself. Her quiet strength was becoming louder. She was speaking up, no longer hiding behind her husband's shadow. One evening we sat on the porch of her house, just the two of us, watching the sun dip below the horizon. The air was cool, the kind of cool that felt like a relief after a long scorching summer. "You know," she began, her voice soft but firm, "I never really understood what you were going through. I always thought I was protecting you by keeping things quiet. By keeping everything under control." I turned to look at her, noticing the way her eyes were focused on the sky, distant but not lost. "Mom, you don't need to apologize for that," I said, squeezing her hand gently. "I get it now. I understand why you did what you did. But you can't keep carrying it all alone anymore." She looked at me, her eyes misting over. "I just didn't know what else to do. I never thought I was strong enough to leave him. But watching you stand up to him, that's what gave me the courage to take my own steps. I'm learning, Anna. I'm learning how to live for myself." My chest tightened at her words. It was the first time I saw her admit to herself that she wasn't just a caretaker, that she was her own person, with her own needs and her own desires. "I'm proud of you," I whispered, not sure if she fully understood how much those words meant to me. "I'm proud of you too," she said, her voice breaking slightly. "For everything you've done. For everything you've become." We sat there for a long time, in that peaceful silence that felt comfortable, like the world was holding its breath, waiting for the next chapter to unfold. But that wasn't the only shift happening in my life. I was learning more about myself every day, facing old fears and stepping into new roles. My job at the agency had been my escape, my way of staying busy, but it was also becoming something more. I was good at it, better than I had expected actually, and I had a sense of purpose that I hadn't known I was missing. My team at work began to notice the change in me. I was more assertive, more confident. I was taking on challenges that I had once shied away from. At first, I wasn't sure what I was doing, but as time passed, I realized that my strength wasn't just in leaving my father behind. It was in embracing who I was. And I was good at this. One afternoon, my boss called me into his office. He sat me down and smiled, something that hadn't happened very often when I first started working there. "I've been watching you, Anna," he said, "and I've been impressed. You've shown incredible growth over the last few months. I think it's time for you to take on more responsibility. How do you feel about taking the lead on our next project?" I stared at him, stunned. The offer was unexpected. "Are you serious?" I asked, not sure if I was hearing him right. He laughed, clearly amused by my reaction. "Absolutely. You've earned it." I didn't even hesitate. "I'm in." That moment, that feeling of being chosen for something I had earned, felt like another piece of the puzzle clicking into place. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was thriving. The project was tough. There were long nights, complicated negotiations, and plenty of obstacles along the way. But as I stood at the finish line, watching the team celebrate our success, I realized that it had been the first time I had felt truly proud of myself in years. It wasn't because of anyone else. It was because I had done it for me. But as time went on, something shifted in the way I viewed my relationship with my father. The anger that had once consumed me didn't burn quite as hot anymore. I wasn't angry at him anymore. But I was still hurt. And I still wasn't ready to forgive him. But forgiveness wasn't something I was going to rush. It was something that would come when I was ready, not when he expected it. A few months after the project had ended, I found myself back at the house. The one I had grown up in. My father had called me again, and this time I didn't ignore him. I wasn't sure if I was ready to face him, but I knew I had to. I knew I couldn't keep running forever. He wasn't at the door when I arrived, which surprised me. But then when I stepped inside, I saw him sitting at the kitchen table. His shoulders were hunched. His hands folded in front of him. He didn't look like the man I had left behind. "Anna," he said quietly, his voice a little broken, "I've been trying to reach you. I know I've hurt you. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness. But I've changed. I'm not asking for your forgiveness. I'm just asking for you to see that I'm trying." I didn't know what to say. My mind raced. My emotions conflicted. But I stood there, silent, looking at him, seeing the man who had hurt me, the man who had torn me apart. And I saw something else too. I saw someone who was trying to be better, trying to be human again. "You can't change the past," I said, my voice steady but soft. "But I'm not the same person I was when I left. And neither are you. Maybe we can't fix everything. But we can move forward." He didn't say anything for a moment. But I saw a flicker of hope in his eyes. Small, fragile hope. "I don't know if I can ever fix what I've done," he said, his voice full of regret. "But I'll spend the rest of my life trying to make it right." And for the first time I didn't feel the anger. I didn't feel the hate. I just felt tired. But a different kind of tired. A tired that came from letting go. A tired that came from no longer needing to fight. "Let's see where we can go from here," I said. We didn't hug, we didn't cry. But there was something between us. Something that hadn't been there before. Maybe forgiveness would come. Maybe it wouldn't. But either way, we had both taken a step toward something new. And that was enough for now.